For a long time, I was married to a woman who made me feel invisible. But today, at this altitude...
Say something for the camera, sis.
Smile.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of passenger. I was wrong. Tonight's story didn't happen in my cockpit, but a colleague told me about it years ago, and I've never forgotten it. This is the story of a woman in seat 27C and the microphone that was never her husband's to hold. This is Flight 1206. Watch closely. A woman sat in coach, hands folded, calm in a way most people never learn how to be. 31,000 feet up, a stranger beside her, a whole cabin of people with no idea who she was. Her name was Aisha Mensa. She'd booked that seat herself. Coach, middle of the plane, no upgrade, no name on the leather. She could have flown anywhere on this aircraft she wanted. She'd chosen the back on purpose. She wanted one last time to watch the man she'd married when nobody who mattered was looking. She wore a plain navy cardigan. No jewelry except a small gold pin shaped like a compass tucked beneath her collar where no one could see it. A woman you'd pass in an airport and forget entirely. Up front, past the curtain in the wide leather seats, where the drinks came in real glasses, sat her husband, Marcus Bell. No relation to me, just a coincidence of names. Handsome, confident. A man who'd spent 11 years teaching himself to forget who'd actually built the life he was living. The seatbelt sign was still on when Marcus stood, walked to the galley, leaned in close to a flight attendant, said something that made her laugh, and she handed him the intercom. "Good afternoon, everybody," he said, warm as syrup. "Sorry to interrupt, but I've got something I couldn't wait to say." Heads turned. Strangers smiled the way people smile when they think something sweet is coming. Aisha didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the seat back in front of her, one thumb moving slowly over the other, back and forth. "For a long time I was married to a woman who made me feel invisible," Marcus said. Nervous chuckles rippled through the cabin. "But today, at this altitude in front of all you good people as my witnesses," he turned toward the galley, toward a young flight attendant with her lips painted and her smile ready. "I'm asking Dana to be my wife." The cabin made that soft, collective sound. The awe. Someone clapped. Dana pressed both hands to her chest. In seat 27C, Aisha closed her eyes. He was still married. The ring was still on her finger 20 rows back. He hadn't divorced her and moved on. He'd announced his next wife over the cabin speakers, with his current one sitting close enough to hear every word. A second voice cut through the cabin, sharp, delighted, filming. Marcus's sister, Yolanda, walking backward down the aisle, phone raised. "Say something for the camera, sis," Yolanda called, aiming it directly at Aisha's face. "Come on, don't be shy. You always so quiet. Smile, you're going viral today." Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some finally understood. This wasn't a stranger being filmed for fun. This was the wife. Then a third voice from the front, Marcus's mother, Constance, not even bothering to turn around fully. "Some women you upgrade, baby," she said to the cabin at large, "and some women you leave in coach." A ripple of laughter. Not everyone, but enough that it wrapped around Aisha like cold water. The man beside her, a stranger in a canvas work jacket asleep since takeoff, woke somewhere in the middle of it. He looked at the phone in her face, then at her, and quietly, so only she could hear, asked, "You all right, ma'am?" She gave him the smallest nod. Something in her chest moved at that. A stranger, the only person on the plane who'd thought to ask. Husband, sister, mother-in-law, and the flight attendant glowing in the aisle. 4 people, 1 woman. 31,000 feet with nowhere to go. Then Marcus did something worse than the words. He walked the length of the plane back to 27C and dropped a folder onto her tray table. Right there in front of the stranger beside her, in front of the whole watching cabin. "Sign these before we land," he said, quiet, but not quiet enough. "Do it clean, Aisha. For once, don't make a scene." Aisha lifted her eyes slow. She looked at the folder. She looked at the man she'd married when he had holes in his shoes. Her hand rose, not to the papers, but to her collar, where her fingers found the small compass pin hidden beneath the fabric, and pressed it, just for a moment, like it was giving her strength. "Okay," she whispered. One word. Marcus smiled like he'd won, and walked back to first class. But a young flight attendant near the back, the same one who'd handed him the intercom, had seen Aisha's hand go to her collar, and something crossed her face. Recognition. She turned and hurried toward the cockpit faster with every step. "Hold on to that. We'll come back to it." Her father used to tell her back when she was a girl with grease under her fingernails. Real engines don't announce themselves, they just run true. To understand why this woman didn't flinch, we have to go back. To a small airfield, a mechanic's dream, and a compass pin. Before she was Mrs. Bell, she was Aisha Owusu. Her father, Samuel Owusu, ran a tiny regional charter operation out of a cracked pavement airfield on the edge of a town most maps forgot. He wasn't rich. He'd never be rich. But he loved flying the way some men love their children. Every afternoon, young Aisha sat on an overturned fuel drum and watched him work, handed him wrenches, listened to him talk about engines the way a doctor talks about hearts. "One day, baby girl," Samuel would say, "I'm going to build something real, not just fixing other men's planes, a whole company, wings for folks nobody ever gave a window seat to." She believed him because that's what children do when their fathers dream out loud. A bigger regional carrier wanted his land. They spread word he was unsafe, sloppy finished. It wasn't true, but a lie in a good suit beats the truth in coveralls, and they took his airstrip, his reputation, and eventually, a few winters later, his heart gave out, and the town buried him, believing his dream had died in the dirt with him. Hold that thread, we're coming back to it. Aisha met Marcus when they were both young and both broke. Back then, he'd walk 2 miles in the rain to bring her dinner. Back then, he held her hand and swore they'd make it out together. When his small logistics business started sinking and the banks turned cold, Aisha did what love does. She sold the modest diamond her mother had left her, and she poured everything she had into keeping his dream breathing. She thought he'd remember that forever. She was soft. That was never her weakness. It only looked like one. Marcus wasn't born a villain. Nobody is. He had a wound, and the wound had a voice, his mother's. Constance never thought Aisha was good enough, not because Aisha did anything wrong, but because she was quiet, and Constance mistook quiet for weak. "You settled, baby," she'd whisper at every family dinner. "A man like you could have had someone who lights up a room." Year after year, that whisper did its work. Because here's the human truth about Marcus. He never felt like a man next to Aisha. She handled everything quietly. Bills, hard calls, trouble, and instead of gratitude, he felt small. A certain kind of man would rather burn the house down than feel small inside it. That's where Dana came in. Young, bright, loud, in all the ways Aisha was soft and still. Dana had grown up genuinely hungry, the kind that leaves a mark, and swore she'd never be poor again. When a confident man told her he had a new life opening up, a door about to swing wide, she grabbed on with both hands. She didn't know the life he bragged about wasn't his to give. She wasn't evil, she was desperate, and desperation makes people blind. Yolanda and Constance poured gasoline the whole way, telling Marcus that Aisha was hiding money, holding him back, that he deserved better. The irony, she was hiding something, just not what they thought. In first class, Marcus leaned close to Dana, laughing. "Soon as she signs those papers, I'm done carrying dead weight." A whole decade holding that woman up. What none of them knew, the airline they were flying, Meridian Regional, was part of a much larger holding company, one that employed 30,000 people across a dozen states. Every paycheck, every pilot's salary, every flight attendant's uniform allowance ran up to a single name at the top, a name worth more than every dream Marcus had ever bragged about stacked together and multiplied. Marcus had been living inside that fortune for 11 years without once asking whose it was. Back in 27, Aisha rose quietly and walked to the small lavatory at the rear of the plane. She slid the door shut, looked at herself under the ugly fluorescent light, and the woman who never broke. Quiet shoulders, shaking, gripping the edge of the sink. She thought about the boy who'd walked through the rain with dinner in his hands, and the man who'd just dropped divorce papers on her tray table for sport. It's not cruelty that breaks a strong person. It's the memory of love measured against the distance it's traveled. She whispered to the mirror, "You were never carrying me, Marcus. Not once." A gentle knock. The same young flight attendant. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to disturb you. The captain would like to confirm your instructions." Aisha went very still. She wiped her face and slowly, for the first time all flight, she smiled. Real engines don't announce themselves, they just run true. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice came over the same intercom Marcus had abused an hour before, but this time, there was something careful and proud in it. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire crew of Meridian Regional, it is the honor of my career to welcome aboard the founder and chairwoman of Owusu Aviation Holdings, Ms. Aisha Owusu." Silence. Not the kind you'd expect. It started with the crew, the young attendant at the back straightening, turning toward 27C, standing still, head slightly bowed. Then another, and another, up and down the aisle, until every uniform on that plane had turned toward the quiet woman in the navy cardigan. The silence spread forward, to the front rows, to first class, to Marcus, his face drained color by color. "Owusu," he said, voice cracking. That's her maiden name. That's a coincidence." It wasn't. She hadn't married into money. She'd built it quietly, patiently, over 11 years under her father's name in the dark, while a whole family stepped over her and called her dead weight. She had taken the mud they'd thrown on the Owusu name and carried it into the sky herself. Owusu Aviation Holdings. Her father's dream hadn't died in that hangar. It had simply been waiting for his daughter to be ready. Aisha rose from 27C slow and unhurried and lifted her collar to unpin the small compass pin, moving it where everyone could see it right over her heart. She walked up the aisle past the standing crew, past the staring passengers, through the curtain, into first class, into the wide leather seats where her husband sat frozen, where Constance's mouth hung open and Dana's ready smile had finally completely died. Yolanda's phone was still raised, hand shaking the little red recording light, trembling as she began to understand exactly what she'd captured. Every weapon they'd used, they'd handed straight to her. The microphone Marcus grabbed to shame her became the microphone the captain used to honor her. The phone Yolanda raised to humiliate her, instead, made her a legend. The uniform Dana wore to feel superior belonged in every sense to the woman she'd been smirking at. Marcus stood panic-naked on his face. "Aisha, wait, we can fix this. 11 years, baby, that's gotta count for something." She stopped. She turned. She didn't scream. She didn't laugh. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single plain envelope and held it out to him. "You had 11 years to say my name like you meant it," she said quietly. "Take this. It's a fair settlement. More than you're owed if we're being honest. Go build something honest, Marcus. It's the only kind that lasts." She slid her wedding ring off her finger and set it gently in his open palm on top of the envelope. Then she turned and walked into the light of the terminal, alone, her father's compass pin catching the light over her heart. Constance, the woman who'd whispered, "You settled," for over a decade, went home to a quiet house and a son with nothing. No wife, no fiancé, no fortune. Just the echo of every cruel thing she'd taught him to believe. Dana looked at Marcus, then at the plane, the uniform on her own body, the ladder she'd climbed, turning to smoke beneath her feet. "All of this," she said, gesturing at the terminal. "You had me thinking you were somebody. You were standing on top of her the entire time." She walked away fast, chasing the next ladder, and was quietly reassigned to the smallest routes the company flew, because you do not disrespect the founder on her own aircraft, and keep your wings. Yolanda's video did go viral, just not the way she'd planned. The internet learned quickly who the quiet woman in the navy cardigan actually was, and the laughter turned around and pointed straight back at her. Months later, Aisha stood in the rebuilt hangar at the edge of that same small town. New roof, smooth pavement planes rolling in and out all day, carrying people who'd never been given a window seat before. She wasn't bitter. Bitterness is heavy cargo, and she'd let it go somewhere over the clouds. A girl hung around the hangar that week, 12 years old, grease under her nails, watching the mechanics with hungry eyes. Aisha knelt in front of her the way her father once knelt for her, and unpinned the small compass pin from her own collar. "This was given to me by my daddy," she said, "by a man who believed in me before anybody else did. Now I'm giving it to you." She pinned it over the girl's heart. "One day you're going to fly higher than they'll ever tell a girl like you is allowed to. Keep it close. And remember, real engines don't announce themselves. They just run true." The girl looked up, wide-eyed. Somewhere above them, a plane climbed off the runway, silent from the ground, just lifting. That's the story of Aisha Owusu. They put her in the back of the plane, and never once asked whose plane it was. They mistook her quiet for weakness, and her kindness for foolishness. They were wrong about all of it. At 35,000 feet, everyone wears the same seatbelt. But dignity was never something that needed a microphone. It just lifts. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's always another flight, and always someone quietly carrying more than anyone around them will ever know.